So just a quick question to all of you, really. How does it feel, and what do you think, seeing all of the films together after... It's been a very, very short amount of time, really, to turn them around. From September, I think it was, last year, that we first... So the ideas were still being hatched in September. How does it feel to see the films together?
Well, I'm incredibly proud. That's the first thing to say. I think everyone in the room will agree how impressive the range of films is, and how high the quality is. I think I'll also be joined with the filmmakers in feeling an immense sense of relief. They all made it onto screen, and they are all as fantastic as the sort of visions for them were when they were chosen. I think what really strikes me is that sort of, as I said, I've sort of seen them through their development, and, we've all sort of fed back and seen different cuts of them, but seeing them on the screen all together is just how much, we picked the sort of digital, the World Wide Web as a theme, but just seeing them all together like that, you just realise how much it is just about people, human stories, and digital, how we make digital an extension of who we are. And that's what just struck me, is how many amazing individuals and stories there were up there on that screen today. And it's testament to the amazing filmmakers who are all, well, hopefully most of them are all here. Just so well done, actually.
Yeah, no, I feel much of the same. It's really incredible to see how they've all come together, particularly as a collection, because they are so amazing individually, but they really do work as a whole to kind of complement each other and explore the different themes. And I mean, yeah, I'm so impressed that you all managed to kind of pull it out the bag in such a short production window. Like, it was, huge to do. And a lot of the filmmakers have kind of jobs outside of this, and, it's a really impressive feat for anyone who has been involved in filmmaking, for people to be able to turn this around in kind of 10, 11 weeks, which is, hats off to them.
Yeah, congratulations to the filmmakers. I had much less involvement in this initiative than Lily and LAMIA, but I wrote a speculative blog at the start of the launch, speculating on what we might see when these commissions came through, and I think they've surpassed my expectations. I'm really interested to see all the sort of the internet and digital connectivity in all its light and dark, and all the complexity of the areas in between. What I've most enjoyed about them, I think, is what a humane selection they feel like. They're all, visual storytelling always driven through characters, but these very much feel like these are people stories about the way in which the contours of our existence are being redrawn in relation to the relative connectivity that we get either at a local level, a community level, an internet level, a satellite level, a worldwide level, or what have you. But I'm also think that there's some really meaty questions being chewed over in there about the potential that technology has to bring us together, but also to drive us apart, potentially, between consumer empowerment but labour exploitation, or local community versus World Wide Web, as we saw in the last film. So really, really fascinating selection of films. And for my part, I'm looking forward to acquiring them for preservation into the National Archive after they're...
Fantastic.
Yeah. So.
On an elementary level, taking the internet as a subject for what you see on screen, we spend all our time in our laptops, all our time on our phones, so much time that our relationships are falling apart, it turns out, this week. Is that not potentially a boring subject for putting on screen? And did it worry you at the outset that we might just have lots of people looking at phones? Trying to communicate through screen culture is quite hard, isn't it, in filmmaking?
I think it was more the challenge of kind of how the filmmakers will show it and kind of do it, visual justice, because we live in such a kind of technicolor world that is, portrayed in so many different ways online, and we have this kind of like language, this like digital native language, and I'm so impressed how the kind of filmmakers have used that sort of dialogue that we have with each other to translate that on screen with, relatively low budgets, which is like really impressive as a thing to do. I think it was something from our side that we were, nervous about, whether or not it would look kind of as professional as we hoped. And I mean, you guys have really, pulled it out the bag. So we're really glad about that. And we thought it offered a really kind of rich sort of opportunity for a really, really kind of dynamic exploration of kind of digital language, because, we have some people in the middle of nowhere then some memes. So
I think what's interesting, actually, if you look at the range of the films, we're about the internet, we're before the internet, we're post-internet, we're in the internet, we're around it. So actually, there was so much visual possibility, and that's the thing, actually, when we were choosing the films and we spoke to the filmmakers once we'd come to the shortlist, it was one of the things we sort of asked people, was, how are you going to bring this to life? What are your visions? And what was really exciting about this set of filmmakers is everybody came with really strong vision of how they were going to bring it to life and to screen. And some of it was much... What's the beauty of a scheme like this, I guess, is that you do things outside the normal way that you would do them. And so actually some of the approaches people took were completely innovative and original, and some of it you've seen a little bit on screen before, but some of it was entirely new, and that's what's really exciting about a scheme like this.
I find screens on screen can be perilous and sort of, in some ways, sort of inherently anti-dramatic, but it felt like in this set of films that the iconography of the net was coming through in a very organic way. It's a real challenge, isn't it, for contemporary makers telling contemporary stories not to represent humans in their form of ubiquitous digital engagement, and you just have to look at the stats on your iPhone to realise you spend far much more time like this than you would otherwise do. I'm very, very interested to see if this is going to change over time, and the extent to which this generation of filmmakers and indeed the sort of 14 and 15-year-olds coming through starting to make films who are watching short form work a lot of the time and small on the small screen, to see the extent to which that inflects their image making. If films and content is being watched less on big screens or consumed more readily on small screens, to what extent does that feed into the production mentality or the writing mentality of people who are making images and increasingly sort of magpieing from across the internet? It's really interesting.
I do think there's a really interesting visual language kind of coming through, and that these films really sort of take that and push it further. And
yes, and sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it was just in the way shots were framed, or the aspect ratios chosen, or just in some of the visual design. I sort of think we're seeing a real intermingling happening. So it's not necessarily that somebody going, here's an internet shot and here's a filmic shot. It's how what we've gotten used to online is starting to affect what we think of as a filmic shot. And I think that's really exciting.
It's really amazing in actually to watch My Sweet Prince, just to realise that this, I think the footage recorded on the sort of handheld personal video cameras only from the turn of the century, effectively, but the internet dial-up at the time caused titters across. It wasn't very long ago, actually, that was happening, and the way in which images have circulated has transformed beyond all recognition in only about 15 years. If we think, it's World Wide Web Day, YouTube was created in 2005. And is now the largest repository of moving image the world has ever known. So, we've gone from sort of handing videos around to where we are now in 20 years or what have you. It's
amazing how nostalgic some of that imagery and sound is.
Yeah.
And, they're sort of seeing an MSN Messenger or Gaydar, or hearing that amazing sound, which just transports us all back to that moment. And you think it's only, I think it's only 30 years. Of course, I'm older, so that's why I think it's only 30 years, but it's incredible how ubiquitous and normalised it all is now.
I love that scene with him trying to keep the noise quiet because he was going about his business, and that time when you didn't have the computer in your own room necessarily, it was out there. I mean something we saw with that film and with many others was the strength and positivity of the internet, connecting people, surfacing marginalised identities, voices, sexualities, and providing a place for kind of connection and visibility. Was that how much was that coming through from all the applications that you had, and did it seem to be kind of a consistent
story? We were very, very lucky in that we had a huge number of applications, kind of over 450, which was incredible and challenging to get through. And there was probably a little bit of a skew towards the negative side of the internet. So the stories that we pulled out and we really kind of were drawn to were the ones that kind of showed multifaceted experiences of the internet, because there's kind of good and bad in everything. And I think this collection of films really does explore the kind of nuance of that, because it is incredible that we have this kind of facility to connect with people from all over the world who have a shared experience, and you would never know that. And I think that's what's so nice about this, is that we're kind of holding up a mirror to people holding up a mirror of themselves. It's kind of like, it's really, really interesting.
Identity was just super core to a lot of the ideas that came through. And it was almost, at first, I think we were sort of like, oh, I don't know if we expected that, but it was a little bit like, well, duh, it's the internet. It's a little bit like, oh, it's the economy, stupid. It's the internet, and it is about who we are. And this technology has come along, and it has allowed people to be who they are in an incredibly visible and connected and sometimes positive, sometimes negative way. But I think one of the things that emerges to me out of the humanity of these stories is the resilience of people, and how the internet has highlighted that. It can, tear you down, build you up, but people are finding from it what they need, I think, for the most part. That final scene in My Sweet Prince, where it's sort of, I see you, or whether it's Candy, in perhaps a more negative way, sort of refining this online persona. She starts off as, I think, the Miss Candy 786, and she ends up as Candy Queen, and she sort of starts off as this sort of this innocent, and ends up sort of this glossy, almost cookie cutter girl blogger. I'd give Miriam, you will know exactly what what you intended to do. But this idea that you take and you shape from those tools, and you take from it what you need at that moment in time, was quite core to a lot of the ideas we got.
And I would say, as much as some of the work feels celebratory in terms of these sites of empowerment where clumsy old analog or traditional society has not been very good or has lagged behind, and the internet has facilitated this flourishing of identity online, that quite a few pieces did come with a sort of quiet warning tag as well, a preoccupation about the logical extension of investing too much of yourself into the projecting too much of yourself into the online space. And I think some of the films are very smart in the way in which they blur the boundaries of projected self in the online space with reality. I'm thinking particularly of Tony with an Eye, where the classroom scene is shot simultaneously from within her fantasy projection of herself, and also the sort of slightly more prosaic, slightly strange reality that her classmates are watching, and that's done very well to comic effect. But I was quite scared in that film, actually, that it wasn't going to come good for her, and the highs of the internet are high and the lows are so low. It's a fickle space, and deriving too much of your self-esteem from online approbation perhaps is, I don't know, it's something that I
yeah, there were quite a few warnings. I think that sort of near future that we sort of see in Skin and in binge watching are also sort of both absolutely fascinating and alluring, but also terrifying. And the idea that connection, so that we see sort of in Roger as well, this idea of human connection can be both disrupted and also taken advantage of. So stop and search becomes entertainment. Living in someone else's head, VR, you can either be on a beach or you can be in an extreme situation, and both of those things can end with you in your living room barely affected, which is it's terrifying.
I think that's what's so great about having done this at this particular moment, is that we've had the internet for a long enough time for ideas to kind of form, and for us to go through the first round of ideas of what the internet really meant, and we've kind of come out the other side. And we're now looking back at the past, at the present, and at the future, and I think these films do that really, really well.
Yes, I mean, there's so many, to quote the film, hazards, harassments, and harms that are associated with the story of the internet, and which I'm sure there would have been enough from the applications to kind of have focus entirely on those. What came through when you finally saw the films that from when you'd commissioned them that sort of surprised you as well in the sort of in the detail or in the style? Were there surprises when they were delivered?
Well, they were all completely sort of revelatory in their own way. Apart from the internet being all about snakes and flights to Wales, which is, I think what surprised me the most is there's a sort of sense of ingenuity about the films. It's not necessarily about the themes, but about the films themselves. I think we could easily have come away from this pitch, the scheme and the process away from it with a whole bunch of films that were quite sort of shallow. Not shallow, like sort of that they were, they would have been about memes and cats and trolling and not gone down as far. But how nuanced the films are is I think, for me, what was the most revelatory thing. I think when you sort of say, we're going to make a series of films about the anniversary of the World Wide Web, somebody joked in the office, and I think I said this last time, it's like, where are all the cat videos? Where are all the lol cats and Icon has cheese? But it's sort of like, actually, we moved past it. That's just like, and now we're really into the proper meat of how this has changed our lives. And I think that for me was just the most satisfying as well as revelatory thing. I don't know if you...
Yeah, no, I felt very similarly. I think, as I say, we kind of commissioned what we hoped would be a really beautiful collection, and when they came together, they did really work together, and I think that is quite an unusual balance to get when we are going through kind of documentaries, docudramas, dramas, and they're all so different. I think, I'm sure Plimsoll, the amazing Plimsoll team, will be able to kind of speak to how tailored and kind of bespoke, I think, the production experience they had with the filmmakers. Whilst we worked more kind of on the commissioning and development side, we know that they kind of spearheaded a really, really unique, I think, experience for each of you guys, where you got to, really explore, but have someone really guide you through the films. And I think that was really interesting, seeing how you all responded to a brief, how you kind of came in and then responded so well to the feedback and to the development notes that we gave. Because we were kind of all a little bit in uncharted territory, because there's a lot of clearances that come with internet stuff. So I think that was some of the surprises, that there were challenges and unexpected places, but victories for everyone. So that was great.
I was 18 when the internet arrived in my house, so I'm part of that awkward generation that wishes they were probably a little bit more digitally savvy than they are, sort of digital straddler. And I'd always lazily assumed that it was sort of our age and above that was most angsty or critically engaged with what's going on with digital. But actually, these films, I think, have proved that younger filmmakers are equally as critically engaged with the sort of world that they're living in. So that was very heartening for me. And the two films that I particularly enjoyed, I think they're all fantastic. I don't know why they speak to me personally, are the documentaries looking at community life, so that the outlying at the end, and Without Bounds to Beat. I think they're so interesting about what happens to traditional community and local connection. I think that the shot in Outlying of the community centre, I'm sure it's just a contextualising shot, but it takes on extra resonance that it's empty, and at the same time all this connectivity is coming. What does it mean to be one of 5 children but with access to the planet, even though you can't get off an island? I think that's such an intriguing idea.
For me, the physicality of the internet in that film, it's like, actually, a guy has to come and dig a hole and lay a cable and connect it up to your house. And actually, it's, for most of us, it's like, it's magic. I pick up my phone and I press buttons and it all just appears. But actually, there's this, the lovely thing about the range of films, as you got a sort of sense of, Tony in her, in a living August video clip and it going around the world like that, but also the fact that that's enabled by cables in ground. It's quite a beautiful range.
At the outset, we talked as well about how there might be kind of applications for people who wanted to quote a lot of material from the net itself and use all sorts of rights owned material. And this will have been the first time that many of these filmmakers have come into contact with a broadcaster. Were there any things from the front line there in terms of what was allowed, what wasn't allowed? And
yes, not.
Did you change the direction of any of the films consequently, or kind of?
I think we tried not to. I mean, that was the sort of spirit of the scheme, was to try and find ways to enable but keep a sort of safe house for the films. I mean, it's very different making a film that's going to go onto a broadcaster into the BFI archive than it is to make a film that might not have as big a platform. There were lots of things. Rights are really tricky to work with when you're working with online stuff, and a lot of the filmmakers found out it was easier to recreate or make from scratch than to use existing stuff. you know, learning how to negotiate with the big players. You know, can I please, Mr. Google, can I please, Mr. Facebook, use your branding? Trying to replicate brands that no longer exist and trying to contact people who might own images for companies that have now, because we're talking about the past, and that's really tricky. Some of the filmmakers were really brave and told stories where they had more vulnerable contributors, and we worked really hard to protect those vulnerable contributors while still staying true to their story. So I'd like to think that this was not just about realising amazing films and creating great content, but it was also about, hopefully, a bunch of filmmakers who are going to have incredible futures in the industry, learning some of that stuff along the way. And we were very lucky to be working with Plimsoll, who kind of housed the productions. But where we could, we asked the filmmakers to take this on themselves. It was almost like sort of watching from afar, but making sure there was a safety net. We tried to do that as much as possible. In fact, I would say that we were less directive with the editorial than we might be with an ordinary commission. We tried to help the filmmakers realise their vision as ambitiously as possible. But I think if I was working with an independent production company who I'd commissioned for a normal film, not in a scheme, I would, you know, there'd been change this, do that. Whereas with this, we were more like, perhaps you might think about, because we wanted the filmmakers to really use this opportunity to do something that aligned so much with what they wanted to achieve. That was at the core of the project.